In our Logos Sunday School class, we've been reading and discussing the 5 love languages. That is the 5 different ways in which we give or receive love. One is words of affirmation, quality time, acts of service, gifts, and physical touch. And I'm sure you're wondering what love languages has to do with a stewardship testimony and our generous future, but just hang with me for a minute. Our Sunday school class discussion began really by taking a personal inventory or a quiz about how I prefer to give and receive love. And then our conversation sort of extended to the exploration of the love language of our respective partners. How does our partner give and receive love? And in the past few weeks, our consciousness has been raised a bit as we consider how do our children give and receive love. And last week, Pastor Helen challenged our Sunday school class to think about God's love language. How do we give and receive love from God? And so when I ponder that question, how do we give and receive love from God, while simultaneously thinking about the idea of a stewardship campaign that acknowledges and attempts to secure our generous future, I immediately think about the worship and work of this church in my life and in this community. And so I'm going to illustrate the connection between giving and receiving God's love and our generous future through the bulletin that you have in front of you. So you're going to need a pen for this. There's probably one in the pew in front of you. Firstly, I'm going to ask you to circle the call to worship. It's about to happen. Did you know that nearly 100 years ago, this church, the building, the property, and the membership of nearly 500 people was a generous gift from First Presbyterian Church downtown? This church was founded by a generous gift, and we've been called to worship here because of that generous gift nearly 100 years ago. I wasn't here for that service, but my first worship service here was about 40 years ago, when the Bogners, they generously dressed me in tights and a Sunday dress. They toted me to church, and I sat on those very steps and listened to a children's message. How generous do we need to be for a 7-year-old on the steps today to say the same thing in 40 years? Would you flip to page 3 in your bulletin? And right at the top, if you'll circle affirmation of faith. In my early teens, I recall going to confirmation classes here at Park Lake. Myself and the other teens whose parents and grandparents are here, sitting in the pews now, watched us study the catechism. What is the chief end of man? The chief end of man is to love God and glorify. You guys get it? Do you remember that? We stood on these steps and we affirmed our faith. And I wonder if God's love language is words of affirmation. Does that fill God's love tank? How generous do we have to be to see other teens commit to growing their faith in this place? Would you again look at the bulletin and circle prayers of the people and the Lord's Prayer? That's also on page 3, a little over halfway down. At Park Lake, we have a long tradition of acts of service. Our prayers for the people are not empty. They are charged with action. We clean up the earth, we bless the pets, we feed those who are hungry, we visit the sick, we support mission projects across the world, we stock the shelves of food pantries, we provide Easter baskets of cheer, we stuff blessing bags. I wonder if our acts of service fill God's love tank. And how generous do we have to be to continue those acts of service that better the lives of our community and beyond? Again, would you look in the bulletin and circle the passing of the peace? It's on page 2. just after the declaration of forgiveness. I'm starting to see a resurgence of hugs and handshakes after COVID's kind of cruel physical distancing. And I remember fondly so many times the pastor trying to convince people to return to their seats when they simply wanted to hug and embrace those around them. So does physical touch remind us of our creation and our redemption story? I wonder how generous we have to be to continue to embrace all people. And I wonder, does that fill God's love tank? And then finally, if you'll look back at page 3 and circle the charge and benediction. Probably my favorite part of the service, not because I'm like a kid waiting for dismissal, but I love the idea of my pastor's hands stretched out wide, acknowledging the quality time that we've spent together and bidding us to take the fullness of this experience out the doors and into the world. Does our quality time together fill God's love tank? And how generous do we have to be to continue to be dismissed from these doors or those doors with a challenge to live in our faith? I think you'll notice that I acknowledged all 5 love languages without asking you to circle probably the most obvious portion of the bulletin when it comes to a stewardship campaign, and that is the presentation of our tithes and offerings. But I'm going to go ahead and ask us to do that now. I'm reticent to discuss money in the house of the Lord the way that you're not supposed to talk about like politics at a dinner party. But the truth is that we can all make offerings that impact our generous future. If not cash, then fill God's love tank with words of affirmation, or acts of service, or quality time, or physical touch. And I'll close with these wise words regarding tithes and offerings. A few weeks ago, I looked to my left just before an usher passed the collection plate, and I read on an envelope, "For being a good church, comma, I give you thanks." Inside that envelope was a currency that read, "In God we trust." And the face of a president didn't matter, because the offering was one that ensures our generous future. And I wonder, did that fill God's love tank? So from the call to worship, through the benediction, in this 100 years, let's fill God's love tank and ensure our generous future. Thank you.